Hi everyone, my name is Adobe. Thank you for joining me. So, I was listening to a YouTube video about Africa in general, if socialism really works for Africa. And it's debatable, you know, in terms of the debate of socialism versus capitalism, which is a very long and winding debate. But my focus is on Africa as a sustainable ecosystem. Currently, with all that's going on with the COVID-19 quarantines and lockdowns, with all that's happening, how is Africa able to sustain its agriculture, its food supply, its entire system, banking, finance? I mean, the US government put $2 trillion to sustain or revive or stimulate the economy. What are African countries doing? And yes, I did say the African continent. US is not a continent, I know. Or is it? Whatever. Well, I'm talking about the United States of America. As a country, it's not a continent. So, how do we discuss or describe the African ecosystem in terms of finance, education, policies, governance, trade, investments, and a whole lot more? I feel that given the current situation of so many uproars about how Africans are being treated in terms from racist comments and policies and immigration laws, almost making sure that Africans don't cross over. But that's topic for another day. I'm talking about, is the African continent running a sustainable ecosystem? If the Chinese were to shut their doors to us, will we be able to survive and put food on our table? I put down a few lists that I was able to put together. So I have infrastructure, stable currency, education, stable political government. I don't know if you think democracy is working for us. I'm not so sure. I don't know if we can go back to the monarchy days. A lot of people would beg to differ, but something's got to give. Okay? Then we talk about official language, like seriously, as a whole continent. If it's not French, it's English. How is it that, if we wanted an official language, I get that we have to or need to interact with the rest of the world, but what is the African language that we can all say, okay, I'm traveling to Botswana or to Uganda. Is it possible for us to have a shared language? Probably English. I could tell. It's going to be difficult learning anything else new, but it's worth a shot, right? Official language. We have to look at what is sustainable at this point because there's a whole lot of superpower fights happening on the international stage. And I bet you that Africa is at the center of the entire plan. The problem is, I don't know if Africans, both home and in diaspora, are aware of what's happening. The last but not least, I'm talking about mutually beneficial alliances, allies. Do Africans or African countries have mutually beneficial alliances, whether it's with other countries or with brands? Don't forget, a lot of the times, I'm going to put this away, a lot of times we're looking for country alliances. What about brands? Brands are really concerned with just business. Remember, economic independence supersedes political independence. It is when you can decide what you eat, how much you're going to pay for it, and where you're going to get it from. Then you can decide and say, we are an autonomous country or nation or continent. At the moment, Africa depends on everybody else for everything, from China to US to Russia, you name it. Africa is a super dependent continent. Now, how sustainable is this ecosystem where if the relationship with this country fails, we run to the next country? At what point will Africa look inward to actually source its needs, resources, and everything it needs to have a sustainable ecosystem? Because at the point where we are right now, we seem up for bid, the highest superpower bidder. That says, if that's the situation, how much of our rights and laws and fundamental human rights do we really think we can pound at the door and say, you can or you cannot, we are a sovereignty, we are a nation, we are a country? If we cannot sustain this entity as a nation, if we cannot sustain our economies, our people, what's stopping the superpowers from coming over? I don't want to use the word to recolonize us, but if we cannot sustain ourselves, we would be at the mercy of anyone waving carrots. I mentioned about 7 practical or sectors that is important to make us a sustainable ecosystem. I mentioned infrastructure. The most basic of infrastructure is road networks and hopefully utility, your power sources, your sewage systems. I mean, if you don't have a good road network, it's almost impossible for urbanization to happen, which is movement of people into more metropolitan type cities from rural areas, just basically bringing up more technology, more powerful economics and stuff like that. Now, outside of the international aids that we receive, what can we really do for ourselves by ourselves? And that question says, if we didn't get external help, would we implode? Would we disappear as a continent? What would the African race no longer be a viable race? Because at some point we need to have the discussion as to how do we remain a viable race on the continent. We have so many intelligent people in the diaspora, home and abroad, so many super smart and intelligent people. But as a continent, we are not a force to reckon with. And that is where the problem is. We've been accommodated in other countries, not continents, other countries, right? So, what happens if they simply displace us and say, you know what, you can live in America or Canada, Italy or Rome, but you will no longer have a home because you can't maintain your home. You need us. So, how are we working to make Africa exist in the next 30 years or maybe? This current ecosystem is not sustainable. It's too external alliance dependent, and it is not forward thinking, and it is super, 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 super needy. Remember, they say there's enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. Africa has to shift focus from present needs to actually have long-term goals and plans. As a continent, we have a North, South, West, and East Africa. West Africa already has plans. Save for the coronavirus, we should have launched the eco currency for all ECOWAS countries, that is the community of West African countries. Now, that would improve trade, that would improve what they call bilateral trade or international trade. That being said, that's just for West African countries. During the split or during the multiplier effects of independence by African countries, some countries went with their colonial currencies, which is where you have the CFA, CFA franc for the francophone countries. Countries like Nigeria adopted their own currency, which is the naira, away from the pounds, and so on and so forth. Now, giving the there's something called trade deficit. That means you are importing more than you are able to export, and this reduces your capacity to earn more. Now, if you're exporting, you get to decide the price and basically value your product. Take, for instance, Ivory Coast and Ghana, the two major countries producing cocoa. I hope I got that right. I will edit in the information below if I got that second country wrong. However, they have come together in recent times in the news to say that they are going to up the cost of cocoa. Therefore, that is a huge step. I mean, for Africa to determine the terms of a contract or agreement, that's huge. That is new. We need to do a lot more of steps like this to make ourselves a viable contributor to the global economy, to the world, to the human race. Enough of the neediness, enough of the aid, and the greatest or the most relevant example of what we need to do as a continent is Rwanda. The president, Paul Kagame, has not only rejected foreign financial loans, which is what has put a lot of African countries out of the negotiating power. Because one thing about debt is if you take debt or loan and you're not using it into an income generating project, you have taken money and spent and you haven't made any new money. You have simply made yourself a debtor and you are indebted to whoever you got that loan from, and they can decide in what way to take payments. So far, we've seen tons and tons of plenty devaluation of currencies, which again beats down the economy. So we do a lot of things that are counterintuitive. We need to step back as countries, hopefully at some point as a continent, because at the end of the day, we're Africans. You can be from Malawi, Botswana, Uganda, or Rwanda. I'm from Nigeria. But every time you step outside the continent of Africa, you're seen as a black person. Ergo, African. Unless we have to identify and say, oh no, I'm from Malawi. Oh no, I'm from Sudan. They see you as, oh, you're African, you're black. So we, as a continent, need to have a much more forward-thinking and sustainable ecosystem for our continent. We already have 60% of the world's most arable land. That means we feed the world. And how is that really helping us? Is if we have that much power, I mean, take away food, water, shelter. So if we hold what the entire world needs, how is it that we are not dictating the terms of the value? We're not dictating the terms of that negotiation. How do you own so much and still beg so much? We're going to take the sectors one by one, and I'm hoping we can have this conversation going and see how we can have a turnaround in value system mindsets and concern for the continent of Africa. And hopefully we would see the reasons why we need to postpone personal or basically postpone personal pleasures for a more grandiose or utopian, but that sounds kind of iffy, but you get my point. for Africa. We need to have and start having conversations about sustainable ecosystems in Africa. And I'm so happy to say that Rwanda is leading this trend. So check out my previous video, like, subscribe, and leave your comments. Love you guys, and happy 1st of May.